On the morning of February 22nd, 2026, a military helicopter was carrying the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere toward Mexico City. He was bleeding out from gunshot wounds. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, the man the world knew as El Mencho, had just been pulled from a firefight with Mexican special forces in the mountain town of Tapalpa, Jalisco. He never made it to the capital. He died in the air at 59 years old, with a $15 million American bounty still attached to his name. Within hours, his cartel set Mexico on fire. But to understand how one man's death could throw an entire country into chaos, you have to understand how a barefoot kid from an avocado farm became the most powerful drug lord on the planet. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born on July 17, 1966, in a tiny rural community called Culotitlan, tucked inside the municipality of Aguililla, in the state of Michoacán, Mexico. The region is called Tierra Caliente, which translates to hot land, and it earned the name honestly. The terrain is harsh, the mountains are steep, and for generations, the families who lived there survived on what they could grow. For the Oseguera family, that meant avocados. El Mencho grew up poor, not struggling poor, dirt poor. He was one of 6 brothers. His father worked the fields. His mother worked the fields. And before he finished 5th grade, El Mencho dropped out of school to work the fields alongside them. He was 11 years old. By 14, he had graduated from picking avocados to guarding marijuana plantations in the mountains around Aguililla. The drug trade was simply part of the local economy in Tierra Caliente. It had been for decades. For a kid with no education and no money, the options were the fields or the fields. The only question was what was growing in them. Sometime in the early 1980s, as a teenager, El Mencho crossed the U.S. border illegally and made his way to California. He settled in the San Francisco Bay Area. What he did in those first few years is not entirely clear, but by 1986, he had already been arrested for stolen property and carrying a loaded gun. In 1989, he was arrested again in San Francisco, this time for selling narcotics. He was deported to Mexico. He came back. In September of 1992, he was arrested a 3rd time, now on federal drug charges in Sacramento. This time, the case was serious. According to court records, El Mencho and his older brother Abraham went to a bar called the Imperial in San Francisco to carry out a heroin deal. The transaction was 5 ounces for $9,500. Abraham handled the exchange. El Mencho was the lookout. But El Mencho was sharper than his brother. He noticed that the buyers handed over perfectly stacked bills instead of loose cash. And through a wiretapped phone call, police overheard him warning Abraham that the men were undercover cops. It was too late. They were both arrested. In court, El Mencho faced a choice. If they both went to trial and lost, Abraham, who already had felony drug convictions on his record, would almost certainly get life in prison. El Mencho decided to plead guilty to protect his brother. The court sentenced him to 5 years. He was sent to Big Spring Correctional Center in Texas, a federal facility that held a large population of immigrants. He served 3 years, was released on parole, and was deported to Mexico for the 2nd time. He was 30 years old. What El Mencho did next is one of the strangest details in his entire biography. He became a police officer. After being deported back to Mexico, he joined local police departments in the Jalisco municipalities of Cabo Corrientes and Tomatlan. How long he served, or what exactly he did during that time, varies depending on the source. But it was brief. He resigned from law enforcement and walked straight into the arms of the Milenio Cartel, one of the criminal organizations operating in western Mexico at the time. In the Milenio Cartel, El Mencho started at the bottom of the violence chain. He joined the squad of hitmen who protected the cartel's leader, a drug lord named Armando Valencia Cornelio, known as El Maradona. El Mencho proved himself useful. He was smart, he was patient, and he was willing to do things that other people were not. He rose through the ranks. When the Mexican authorities arrested El Maradona in August of 2003, and a rival gang called Los Zetas launched an armed offensive against the Milenio cartel in Michoacán, El Mencho and the remaining Valencia family members were forced to flee to the neighboring state of Jalisco. This is where his story changed forever. In Jalisco, El Mencho and the Milenio cartel formed an alliance with a powerful wing of the Sinaloa cartel, led by a drug lord named Ignacio Coronel Villarreal, known as Nacho Coronel. Under Coronel's command, El Mencho managed drug trafficking operations, finances, and enforcement across the states of Colima and Jalisco. He was no longer just a hitman. He was a manager. He was learning how a cartel actually runs, from the money to the murder and everything in between. Then, between 2009 and 2010, two things happened that ripped the power structure of Western Mexico wide open. First, in October of 2009, the Milenio cartel's top leader, Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia, known as El Lobo, was arrested. His brother, Juan Carlos, was arrested the following May. Second, in July of 2010, Nacho Coronel was killed in a shootout with the Mexican army. In less than a year, every boss above El Mencho was either dead or in a cell. The Milenio cartel fractured into two warring factions. One side called itself La Resistencia. The other side, loyal to El Mencho, was called Los Torcidos. El Mencho and his faction launched a propaganda campaign that was unlike anything the Mexican drug world had seen at the time. They rebranded themselves as Los Mata Zetas, meaning the Zeta Killers, positioning their group as vigilantes who were cleaning up Mexico by going after the brutal Los Zetas cartel. In June of 2009, authorities found 3 murdered men in an abandoned truck in Cancun, with a message from the group denouncing kidnapping and extortion. It was theater, it was calculated, and it worked. El Mencho won the turf war against La Resistencia and consolidated control over Western Mexico. Then he changed the name. Los Torcidos became the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. What happened over the next 15 years was an expansion that stunned law enforcement on both sides of the border. Under El Mencho's command, CJNG went from a regional splinter group to one of the 2 most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico, standing alongside the Sinaloa cartel. The growth was relentless. CJNG established operations in at least 21 of Mexico's 32 states. They pushed into Central America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. The U.S. State Department confirmed the cartel had contacts in more than 40 countries. A massive part of this expansion came down to one product: fentanyl. CJNG seized control of the port of Manzanillo in the state of Colima, one of Mexico's busiest shipping ports, and used it to import precursor chemicals from China. Those chemicals were processed into fentanyl and methamphetamine in labs scattered across Jalisco and surrounding states. The DEA called CJNG a key supplier of illicit fentanyl to the United States, generating billions of dollars in profit every year. In 2019, the DEA estimated that CJNG was responsible for at least 1/3 of all drugs entering the U.S. by air and sea. But El Mencho was not just a drug trafficker. He was a businessman who understood market shifts. According to the DEA, when consumer demand in the U.S. changed, he adapted. CJNG started with methamphetamine. When heroin demand grew, they moved into heroin. When fentanyl became the most profitable substance on the planet, they moved into fentanyl. The Mexican government estimated CJNG's total assets at around $50 billion. Kyle Mori, the head of the DEA team specifically tasked with locating El Mencho, told Univision in 2019 that he believed El Mencho's personal net worth was at least $500 million and possibly over 1 billion. The money alone would have made CJNG dangerous, but what made them terrifying was the violence. CJNG became known for military-grade tactics. They used armored vehicles, rocket launchers, drones rigged with explosives, and landmines. In May of 2015, CJNG shot down a Mexican military helicopter during a clash in Jalisco, killing at least 9 people on board. In June of 2020, they attempted to assassinate Omar Garcia Harfuch, the police chief of Mexico City, ambushing his armored SUV with high-powered rifles and grenades in broad daylight. Garcia survived. 2 of his bodyguards and a bystander did not. El Mencho operated differently from drug lords who came before him. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman of the Sinaloa cartel became famous for his tunnels, his prison escapes, and his flashy lifestyle. El Mencho was the opposite. He lived modestly. He moved constantly through the mountains of Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit, never staying in one place for long. He was surrounded by an inner circle of mercenaries with military training and a second, larger ring of operatives who served as lookouts and a rear guard against anyone trying to approach him. Only a handful of verified photographs of the man existed. He was running a global criminal empire, and almost nobody knew what he looked like. The United States kept raising the stakes. In March of 2014, a federal court in Washington, D.C. indicted El Mencho for drug trafficking and leading a continuing criminal enterprise. In April of 2015, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned him under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act, freezing any U.S.-based assets tied to him, CJNG, or his brother-in-law's organization, Los Queenies. In 2022, federal prosecutors filed another indictment, charging him with conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl for import into the United States. The reward for information leading to his arrest was raised to $15 million, the highest bounty the U.S. government had ever placed on a Mexican drug lord. None of it stopped him. For over a decade, El Mencho remained free. Matthew Donahue, the DEA's top agent in Mexico, said in 2019 that Oseguera Cervantes was the #1 priority for the DEA and, frankly, for federal law enforcement in the United States. Former DEA Chief of International Operations, Mike Vigil, later called El Mencho someone operating at almost the same level as El Chapo and El Mayo Zambada. In February of 2025, the Trump administration designated CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization, the first time a Mexican cartel had received that label. It gave U.S. prosecutors entirely new tools to go after anyone associated with the group. And still, El Mencho stayed hidden in the mountains. Until February 22, 2026, when Mexican special forces, armed with U.S. intelligence, found him in Tapalpa. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But El Mencho did not build this empire alone. He married into one of the most powerful criminal families in Michoacán, and over time, he turned his own blood relatives into the command structure of CJNG. His son was groomed to take over. His daughter handled finances. His stepson ran the armed wing. His in-laws bankrolled the entire operation. And one by one, the U.S. government hunted every single one of them down. Section number 2. El Mencho did not marry for love, or maybe he did. But the marriage also happened to be the single most important business decision he ever made. In 1996, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes married Rosalinda González Valencia, a woman from the same rural stretch of Michoacán where he had grown up. Rosalinda was born around 1963. She was the eldest sister in a family of 18 siblings. Her family, the Valencia clan, had been in the drug trade since the 1970s. They started with marijuana and opium poppy, and over time, they built the Milenio Cartel, the same criminal organization El Mencho would later join as a hitman. Rosalinda was the niece of Armando Valencia Cornelio, the Milenio Cartel's founder. the same boss El Mencho had once guarded with his life. Public security analyst David Saucedo later told CNN en Español that El Mencho reached the cartel's leadership through a strategy of diplomacy via marriage. He was not exaggerating. Rosalinda's brothers were the key. Several of them, most notably Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, led a group called Los Queenies, which operated as the financial backbone of everything El Mencho built. Los Queenies was not a street gang. It was a money laundering machine. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Los Queenies financed the founding and growth of CJNG, moving multiple tons of cocaine from South America through Mexico and into the United States. They ran shell companies, real estate holdings, restaurants, and hospitality businesses. According to Mexico's Secretariat of the Interior, Rosalinda herself oversaw CJNG's financial and legal resources, including more than 70 businesses affiliated with the cartel. Her nickname was La Jefa, the boss. And the people who studied the cartel closely understood that while El Mencho was the face and the fist of CJNG, the Valencia family was the wallet. The marriage produced 3 children. Their son was Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, born on February 14, 1990, in San Francisco, California. He would become known as El Menchito. Their eldest daughter was Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez, born in San Francisco as well, who would be known as La Negra. Their youngest daughter was Laisha Michelle Oseguera. Each of them would eventually be pulled into the family business, and each of them would pay for it. But El Mencho also had a stepson. Before marrying him, Rosalinda had given birth to a boy named Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez when she was just 14 years old. Juan Carlos grew up alongside El Mencho's biological children. El Mencho raised him, and over time, Juan Carlos, who earned the alias El Pelón, meaning the bald one, became one of the most important figures in the entire CJNG structure. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence identified El Pelón as El Mencho's de facto second-in-command. Mexico's Defense Secretary, Luis Crescencio Sandoval, identified him as a leader of CJNG's Grupo Elite, the cartel's armed military wing, formed in 2019 and operating across the states of Zacatecas, Guanajuato, and Michoacán. The U.S. State Department placed a $5 million bounty on his head. In October of 2020, a federal court in Washington, D.C. indicted him for conspiracy to traffic more than 5 kilograms of cocaine and more than 500 grams of methamphetamine, with charges dating back to 2007. El Mencho ran CJNG like a family business, because it was a family business. Every position of trust was filled by blood. His brother Antonio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Tony Montana, served as one of the cartel's top financial operators. Antonio was arrested in Guadalajara by the Mexican Army and Navy on December 4, 2015. He was later among 29 wanted cartel leaders taken into U.S. custody on February 27, 2025. As part of a mass extradition deal between Mexico and the United States. Another brother, Abraham, had been given a 10-year sentence in California back in the 1990s. He was later arrested again in Jalisco in 2024. El Mencho's brother-in-law, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, the Los Queenies leader, was arrested by the Mexican Navy on February 28, 2015. He has been fighting extradition to the United States ever since. Another brother-in-law, Elvis Gonzalez Valencia, who served as CJNG's lead financier, was arrested in 2016. A third brother-in-law, Jose Gonzalez Valencia, known as Chepa, was arrested at a beach resort in Brazil in 2017 while vacationing with his family under a fake name. Prosecutors said he had used semi-submersibles and other methods to avoid detection while trafficking drugs for years. On June 20, 2025, he was sentenced in Washington, D.C. to 30 years in a U.S. federal prison. Then there was El Mencho's son-in-law. Jessica Johanna married a man named Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez, known as El Chorro. He was first arrested in 2015 alongside El Menchito, released for lack of evidence, and rearrested the following year. The U.S. government designated him as a CJNG leader. His younger daughter, Leisha, was in a relationship with Christian Fernando Gutierrez Ochoa, a high-ranking cartel operative. In 2021, Gutierrez Ochoa allegedly kidnapped 2 Mexican Navy members in an attempt to force the government to release Rosalinda, who had been arrested that same year. When things got too hot, El Mencho told his associates that he had killed Gutierrez Ochoa for lying. He had not. Gutierrez Ochoa faked his own death, fled Mexico, and resettled in Riverside, California, where he and Leisha lived in a $1.2 million home purchased with laundered cartel money. Prosecutors described it as a CJNG-sponsored life of abundance. He was arrested in California in November of 2024, and on December 19, 2025, was sentenced to over 11 years in a U.S. prison for money laundering. Now, Rosalinda herself. She was first arrested in May of 2018 in Zapopan, Jalisco, on money laundering charges. She was released 3 months later after a judge found insufficient evidence. In November of 2021, she was arrested again, this time for failing to comply with the obligation to sign a court registry for 2 months, and for federal financial crimes. In December of 2023, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for money laundering related to a car wash business she owned in Puerto Vallarta that was used to hide financial transactions. But in January of 2025, a judge approved her early release for good conduct after she had served more than half her sentence. On February 27, 2025, Rosalinda walked out of the Federal Center for Social Readaptation for Women in Coatlan del Rio, Morelos. Reports indicated she suffered from hypertension and a serious undisclosed illness. According to Mexican defense records, she and El Mencho had been separated since May of 2018, and at the time of his death, he was reportedly in a relationship with another woman. But they never divorced, and the family ties between the Oseguera and Valencia clans remained the foundation on which CJNG stood. Jessica Johanna's story shows just how far the American government was willing to reach. In February of 2020, she traveled from Guadalajara to Washington, D.C. to attend a court hearing for her brother, El Menchito, who had been extradited to the U.S. just days earlier. When she arrived, federal agents arrested her on the spot. The charges, unsealed that same day, alleged that she had violated the U.S. Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act by conducting financial dealings with 6 Mexican businesses that had been sanctioned by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control for providing material support to CJNG. Those businesses included 2 sushi restaurants, a tequila company, an advertising firm, and a rental cabin business. Jessica was the owner of 2 of those businesses and an officer or director of 4 others. The Treasury Department had hand-delivered and mailed notifications to her family about the sanctions, including to a California address listed on her passport. She knew. She pleaded guilty to all 5 counts on March 12, 2021. On June 11, 2021, she was sentenced to 30 months in prison. She asked the judge for a lighter sentence so she could return to her 5-year-old daughter in Guadalajara. The judge denied the request. She served approximately 25 months and was released in April of 2022. And that was the pattern. Every branch of the family tree got cut. El Mencho's son sentenced to life. His daughter convicted and imprisoned. His wife arrested twice and sentenced. His brother extradited. His brother-in-law sentenced to 30 years. His son-in-law designated as a cartel leader and still wanted. His other son-in-law caught living under a fake name in California after faking his own death. His stepson indicted and carrying a $5 million bounty. The U.S. Department of Justice said it plainly in a June 2025 press release. These prosecutions reflect the U.S. government's efforts to dismantle CJNG by striking at its most inner circle. Before we move on, If you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But of all the family members the government took down, none of them mattered more than the son. Rubén Oseguera González, El Menchito, was not just El Mencho's child. He was the heir. He was the second in command. He ran international drug trafficking operations. He ordered at least 100 murders, and the story of how he was caught, extradited, and locked away forever is the story of how the CJNG lost its future. Section number 3. Rubén Oseguera González was born on February 14, 1990, in San Francisco County, California. That detail matters. It means that the son of Mexico's most wanted drug lord, the heir to a criminal empire worth an estimated $50 billion, was a United States citizen by birth. He held dual citizenship in both countries. His mother was Rosalinda González Valencia. His father was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. And from the time he was old enough to understand who his father was, his path was set. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, El Menchito was recruited into the family business at 14 years old. That is not speculation. His own defense attorneys confirmed it during his sentencing hearing, asking the judge to consider that he was barely a teenager when the cartel became his life. By the time he was in his early 20s, Mexican government sources identified him as CJNG's second-in-command, operating directly beneath his father. He was not a figurehead. He was not just carrying a famous last name. According to prosecutors, El Menchito managed international drug trafficking operations, oversaw the production of methamphetamine, directed cocaine shipments, and commanded an armed network of hitmen who answered to him personally. He was the operational heart of the cartel, while his father stayed hidden in the mountains. The numbers the DOJ later presented at trial give you a sense of the scale. From 2012 to 2015 alone, El Menchito oversaw the manufacture of more than 3 million pounds of methamphetamine in one area of Mexico. In April of 2015, he personally directed the distribution of over 55,000 pounds of cocaine. And in October of 2013, according to trial testimony, he made plans to go big with counterfeit OxyContin pills, right before the fentanyl epidemic began sweeping the United States. By 2015, a witness testified, El Menchito said he was building an empire with fentanyl. The Mexican authorities first caught him on January 30, 2014. At 3:30 in the morning, a Special Forces unit from Mexico City raided a residence in the Patria Universidad neighborhood of Zapopan, Jalisco, and found Oseguera González sleeping inside. They had tracked him through geolocation on a mobile phone. The Army and Navy deployed soldiers, a helicopter circled overhead, and presumed CJNG members responded in the streets by setting fire to vehicles, including a milk truck and a public bus, and firing at passing cars. Jalisco's public prosecutor had to come out and urge civilians to stay calm. El Menchito was 23 years old. He was taken to the SEDO, Mexico's anti-organized crime agency, interrogated and sent to Altiplano, a maximum security federal prison. Then something remarkable happened. He was released. On October 16, 2014, a judge from the state of Mexico absolved El Menchito of the charges against him, which included illegal possession of firearms, possession of weapons of military exclusive use, use of resources from illicit origins, and crimes against public health. The judge said there was a lack of evidence. El Menchito walked toward the prison exit. He did not make it out the door. Members of Mexico's Criminal Investigation Agency, the AIC, were waiting for him. They rearrested him on the spot. He was taken back into custody and held at the SEDO for 2 months while prosecutors scrambled to build a new case. On December 18th, he was transferred to Puente Grande, another maximum security prison in Jalisco. 8 days later, on December 26, 2014, another judge released him again. This time, the court concluded there was insufficient evidence to hold him for the charges of drug trafficking, overseeing CJNG's financial operations, and leading a group of hitmen. El Menchito walked free. He was out for roughly 6 months. When he was free, the evidence shows he did not hide. According to Mexican government sources, he rejoined the CJNG immediately and began managing their international drug trafficking operations again. Authorities reported that he had undergone nose surgery to alter his appearance and was traveling without bodyguards to avoid drawing attention from law enforcement. On June 23, 2015, the Mexican Army and federal police found him again. The operation took place at 2:15 in the morning in the Lomas de Altamira neighborhood in Zapopan, Jalisco. Officers entered a gated residential neighborhood in several vehicles. They subdued the entrance guard, shot out the security cameras with paintball guns to blind them, destroyed several others, and ordered the guard to cut the electricity. The telephone in the booth rang while they were setting up. Nobody answered it. The guard was told to kneel down. Officers moved in and found El Menchito inside a vehicle alongside his brother-in-law, Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez. The entire operation took about 20 minutes. No shots were fired. Authorities confiscated several weapons from the vehicle, including 2 customized AR-15 assault rifles. One was engraved with the inscription CJNG 02JR. The other said Menchito. These were not generic cartel weapons. They were made for him. They bore his identity. A federal judge ordered his release once again, citing lack of evidence. But this time, Mexican authorities had a backup plan. On July 1, 2015, as the release order became official, prosecutors immediately issued a new arrest warrant, citing El Menchito's alleged connection to 2 cases of forced disappearance. He was taken back into custody, and this time, the Mexican justice system held on. What happened next, according to prosecutors, is that even from inside a Mexican prison, El Menchito continued to run CJNG. Trial evidence later showed that while incarcerated, he negotiated drug transactions, approved the purchase of firearms and destructive devices, including .50 caliber weapons and 40mm grenades, and maintained communication with cartel operatives on the outside. Prison walls did not stop him from operating. They barely slowed him down. Behind the scenes, the U.S. government was working to get him. In March of 2014, a federal court in Washington, D.C. had already indicted El Menchito. The Americans wanted him for conspiracy to distribute cocaine and methamphetamine for importation into the United States, and for using firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking. Mexico fought over the extradition for years. El Menchito's legal team challenged it at every level. But on February 21, 2020, he was finally extradited to the United States. He arrived at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., and appeared before a judge that same day. His sister Jessica Johanna had traveled from Guadalajara to be present for his hearing. She was arrested the moment she arrived on charges of violating the Kingpin Act. El Mencho sent his daughter to support his son, and the U.S. government took both of them. The trial in Washington, D.C. began in September of 2024. What the jury heard over the course of the proceedings was a catalog of violence that spanned years. Prosecutors told the court that El Menchito had ordered the killings of at least 100 people. He personally shot and killed at least 2 individuals. In April of 2015, according to the government's sentencing memorandum, he personally butchered 5 bound men who owed him money for drugs sold in the United States. Prosecutors used the word butchered. On May 1, 2015, during a major Mexican military operation in Jalisco, El Menchito ordered his subordinates to shoot down a Mexican military helicopter so that he could escape capture. They used a rocket-propelled grenade. The helicopter went down. At least 9 people were killed. The attack was one of the most brazen acts of violence against the Mexican military in the history of the drug war. And according to the DOJ, El Menchito gave the order. That same month, less than 2 months after the helicopter attack, El Menchito was cornered by soldiers and police in Jalisco. When he was surrounded, according to the DOJ's press release, he brandished an assault weapon and a grenade launcher and demanded to be released because he was a member of the CJNG. The weapon he was holding bore the same pixel camouflage pattern as other CJNG arms and was engraved with the cartel's name and his nicknames, Menchito, 02, and Junior. He was arrested anyway. That was the June 2015 arrest that eventually led to his extradition. On September 20th, 2024, the federal jury in Washington convicted El Menchito on all counts. The charges included conspiring to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine and 500 grams or more of methamphetamine, while knowing and intending that they would be imported into the United States, and using, carrying, and brandishing firearms, including destructive devices, in furtherance of the drug trafficking conspiracy. 4 days later, on September 24th, he was convicted on additional drug trafficking and firearms charges in a related case. Former U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a statement that day. He said El Menchito led the Jalisco cartel's efforts to use murder, kidnapping, and torture to build the cartel into a self-described empire by manufacturing fentanyl and flooding the United States with massive quantities of lethal drugs. DEA Administrator Ann Milgram said El Menchito was responsible for pushing vast quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States, while engaging in violence, kidnapping, and bribery to build and protect the Jalisco cartel. On March 7, 2025, El Menchito stood before U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell in Washington, D.C. for sentencing. He was 35 years old. Judge Howell called CJNG a notoriously violent cartel. She said El Menchito had a whole team of hitmen at his command. One of his defense attorneys, Anthony Colombo, asked for a 40-year sentence instead of life, arguing that his client was only 14 when he was recruited into the family operation. The judge was not persuaded. El Menchito was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years to be served consecutively. Judge Howell also ordered him to forfeit over $6 billion in drug trafficking proceeds. $6 billion. That is the largest forfeiture order in CJNG history, and one of the largest in any drug trafficking case in U.S. history. After the sentencing, Colombo told reporters from AFP that the life term was greater than necessary and that he would file an appeal. But the consequences of El Menchito's conviction reached beyond the courtroom. CJNG did not accept it quietly. According to the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, the cartel assassinated Ivan Morales Cuarles, a witness who had testified against El Menchito during his trial in the United States. They killed a man on foreign testimony to send a message that cooperating with American prosecutors was a death sentence. The U.S. Department of Justice summarized it in a June 2025 press release. Before his arrest, it said, Oseguera Gonzalez was CJNG's second-in-command and led CJNG for nearly 7 years. He is responsible for trafficking more than 50 metric tons of cocaine and supervising drug labs that produced more than 1,000 metric tons of methamphetamine in Mexico. El Menchito is currently serving his sentence in a high-security U.S. federal prison. He will never be eligible for parole. He will never see the outside of that facility again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the significance of that sentence went beyond one man paying for his crimes. Security consultant David Saucedo told CNN after El Mencho's death that El Menchito, being locked away in the United States, had broken the natural line of succession within the cartel. The son who was supposed to inherit the empire was gone forever, which meant that when the Mexican army killed El Mencho on February 22, 2026, there was no clear heir waiting to take control. The throne was empty, and the military operation that put it there lasted less than a day. Section number 4. The tip came from someone close to one of El Mencho's romantic partners. According to Reuters, citing Mexican officials who gave a detailed timeline on Monday, authorities tracked the partner to a facility in the town of Tapalpa in the state of Jalisco. Tapalpa sits about 2 hours southwest of Guadalajara, tucked into the Sierra Madre Mountains at roughly 6,000 feet above sea level. It is a small town, quiet, known for its cool climate, pine forests, and cabins. It is also deep inside CJNG territory, a region where El Mencho had moved freely for years, protected by layers of armed lookouts and a population that either supported him or feared him too much to say a word. For over a decade, the most wanted man in the Americas had lived somewhere in these mountains, never staying in one place for long, constantly rotating through safe houses, surrounded by former military mercenaries. The intelligence was shared between Mexico and the United States. The operation was planned as a joint effort. The U.S. Joint Interagency Task Force Counter Cartel, a military-led group that specializes in mapping cartel networks on both sides of the border, provided what Mexican officials described as complementary intelligence. The White House later confirmed that the U.S. provided intelligence support. No American personnel were on the ground. This was a Mexican operation. Mexican soldiers, Mexican special forces, Mexican bullets. On the morning of Sunday, February 22, 2026, the Mexican Army moved in. The operation was led by Army ground forces with support from the National Guard, the Mexican Air Force, and intelligence personnel from Mexico's Attorney General's office. The objective was to capture Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes alive. They did not get the chance. When the soldiers reached the location in Tapalpa, they met armed resistance. CJNG members opened fire on the approaching forces. A firefight broke out. Mexico's Defense Secretary, General Ricardo Trevilla Trejo, later described it as a very violent clash between cartel members and Mexican special forces. During the exchange of gunfire, the military killed 4 cartel operatives at the scene. El Mencho was hit. He was critically wounded, but alive when soldiers pulled him from the location. 2 other people at the site were also seriously injured. The military evacuated El Mencho by helicopter, attempting to fly him to Mexico City for medical treatment. He died during the air transfer. The 2 other wounded individuals also died in transit. In total, 7 CJNG members were killed during the operation, including El Mencho. 2 others were arrested. The military seized armored vehicles, heavy weapons, and rocket launchers that officials said were capable of shooting down aircraft and destroying armored vehicles. 3 members of the Mexican armed forces were wounded in the fight and were transferred to Mexico City for treatment. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes was 59 years old. He had evaded capture for over 15 years. The U.S. government had been offering $15 million for information leading to his arrest. Mexico had been offering 300 million pesos, and in the end, the trail that led the military to his door started with someone who knew the woman he was seeing. By the time El Mencho's body was in the air, the cartel already knew he was gone, and the response was immediate. Within hours of the operation, CJNG launched a coordinated wave of retaliatory violence across Mexico that was staggering in its speed and scale. Cartel members set vehicles on fire and used them to block roads and highways in what officials described as narco blockades. Mexico's security agency reported that by Sunday evening, there were 252 blockades across 20 states. Cars, trucks, and buses burned on major roads. Businesses were torched. Gas stations were set ablaze. A Costco store in Puerto Vallarta was burned. Electrical facilities were attacked in at least 8 states, including Jalisco, Colima, Nayarit, and Guanajuato. Guadalajara, the capital of Jalisco and one of the largest cities in Mexico, was hit hard. Armed men appeared on the streets. Gunfire was reported in residential neighborhoods. A reporter on the ground shared video of suspected CJNG members setting a gas station on fire. Burning buses and trucks were abandoned at major intersections. Governor Pablo Lemus Navarro activated a Code Red, the state's emergency security protocol, and suspended all public transportation across Jalisco. He told residents to stay in their homes. Guadalajara, a city of over 5 million people, turned into a ghost town by Sunday night. Schools were canceled on Monday. Several other states followed. Puerto Vallarta, one of Mexico's most popular tourist destinations, was engulfed in smoke. Videos circulating on social media showed plumes rising over the beachfront hotels. People were seen sprinting through the Guadalajara airport in a panic. A witness told reporters he saw execution-style murders on his way to the Puerto Vallarta airport. Tourists were told not to leave their resorts. All taxis and ride-sharing services in Puerto Vallarta were suspended. Businesses across the city shut down. The U.S. State Department issued an urgent advisory warning American citizens in the states of Jalisco, Tamaulipas, Michoacán, Guerrero, and Nuevo León to remain in safe places due to ongoing security operations. The U.S. Embassy noted that roadblocks had impacted airline operations, with domestic and international flights canceled in both Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta. Delta Airlines, Southwest Airlines, Alaska Airlines, and Air Canada all canceled flights and issued travel waivers. American tourists were stranded. An American woman from California, visiting family in the city of Tepic, told CNN she was temporarily separated from her son and did not know where her next meal would come from. She said she was scared of everything. Of the blockades, of the curfew, of the possibility that something could happen while she was alone. The death toll from the retaliatory violence was severe. On Monday, Mexico's Secretary of Security and Citizen Protection, Omar Garcia Harfuch, the same man CJNG had tried to assassinate in Mexico City in 2020, held a press conference. He announced that 25 members of Mexico's National Guard were killed in Jalisco State in 6 separate attacks on Sunday. A prison guard was killed at a lockup in Puerto Vallarta when prisoners rioted. An agent from Jalisco State Prosecutor's Office was killed in Guadalajara. A woman whose identity was not disclosed was also killed. In addition, Garcia Harfuch said approximately 30 criminal suspects were killed in Jalisco, and 4 more were killed in Michoacán. By Monday, authorities reported they had cleared all 85 narco blockades that had been set up on federal highways across 11 states. The international reaction came fast. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau posted on social media that he was watching the scenes of violence from Mexico with great sadness and concern. He called El Mencho one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins and said his death was a great development for Mexico, the U.S., Latin America, and the world. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the United States had provided intelligence support for the operation and said that President Trump has been very clear that the United States will ensure narco-terrorists sending deadly drugs to the homeland are forced to face the wrath of justice they have long deserved. President Trump himself posted on social media on Monday, calling on Mexico to boost its efforts. Mexico must step up their effort on cartels and drugs, he wrote. This was pointed. The Trump administration had been pressuring Mexico to act more aggressively against the cartels for months. In February of 2025, Trump had designated CJNG and 7 other cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, the first time any Mexican cartel had received that label. The designation gave U.S. prosecutors new legal tools and opened the door for more direct military involvement. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum praised the security forces and called for calm. She posted on social media that there was absolute coordination with all state governments, and that in the vast majority of the national territory, activities were proceeding with complete normality. She noted that the operation had been carried out by federal forces and acknowledged the role of the Mexican Army, National Guard, Armed Forces, and the Security Cabinet. But she had long been critical of the kingpin strategy, the approach of targeting cartel leaders, which previous Mexican administrations had used only to see cartels fracture and violence increase in the aftermath. Her predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, had famously adopted a policy of not confronting cartel leaders directly. Sheinbaum had shifted course. David Mora, a senior analyst for Mexico at the International Crisis Group, told reporters that ever since Sheinbaum took power, The army had been far more confrontational and combative against criminal groups. He said the operation signaled to the United States that if the two countries kept cooperating and sharing intelligence, Mexico could handle its own problems without needing U.S. troops on Mexican soil. Former DEA Chief of International Operations, Mike Vigil, called it one of the most significant actions undertaken in the history of drug trafficking. He compared El Mencho to El Chapo Guzman and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, saying they were operating at almost the same level. But Vigil also warned that killing or capturing the head of a cartel was not going to have a major impact on its own. He said the government needed to go after the infrastructure, the logistics, the money laundering, and the armed wings. That warning was not theoretical. The Sinaloa cartel, CJNG's biggest rival, had been torn apart by its own internal war since the capture of El Mayo Zambada in 2024 and the imprisonment of El Chapo's sons. Now, CJNG, the other half of Mexico's two cartel dominance, had lost its leader too. Brookings Institution senior fellow Vanda Felbab Brown told Reuters she expected a tremendous amount of violence to follow. The timing made everything worse. Mexico is set to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup, with matches scheduled to begin in June. Guadalajara, the capital of CJNG's home state, is one of the host cities. Al Jazeera's correspondent John Holman noted from Mexico City that this was particularly sensitive. He said what looked like a government triumph could become a significantly bigger security crisis in the months ahead. For the people of Jalisco, none of the geopolitics mattered on that Sunday night. What mattered was the smoke, the gunfire, the burning roads, and the fear that leaving your house could get you killed. For the tourists trapped in Puerto Vallarta, what mattered was whether there would be a flight out in the morning. For the families of the 25 National Guard members killed in retaliation attacks, what mattered was that their loved ones went to work that day and never came home. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. El Mencho was dead. The $15 million bounty would never be collected on a living man. The cartel he built was wounded, but CJNG was not dead. It was furious. It was armed, and it had no clear leader. The question now was not whether the cartel would survive. The question was, who would take control of it, and whether the fight for that control would tear the organization apart from the inside, the same way the Sinaloa cartel had been tearing itself apart since El Mayo went down. El Mencho's stepson, the man the U.S. government called his de facto second-in-command, was already being named as the likely heir. But taking over a cartel and holding it together are two very different things. Section number 5. Within hours of El Mencho's death, the question that every intelligence agency, every cartel rival, and every analyst tracking Mexican organized crime was asking was the same one. Who takes over? The answer should have been simple. In the cartel world, power usually passes through blood. Father to son, brother to brother. When El Chapo Guzman went to prison, his sons, known as Los Chapitos, fought to hold the Sinaloa cartel together. When other drug lords fell, their relatives stepped in. Cartel succession is dynastic. It follows family lines because family is the only thing a drug lord trusts when everyone around him is either a potential informant or a future assassin. El Mencho had built CJNG the same way. He married into the Valencia family. He promoted his son to second-in-command. He gave his daughter the financial front companies. He placed his son-in-law in leadership. He handed his stepson control of the armed wing. Every critical position in the organization was held by someone who shared his blood, his marriage, or his table. But by February 22, 2026, the family tree had been cut down to almost nothing. His son El Menchito was serving life plus 30 years in a U.S. federal prison. His daughter, Jessica Johanna, had been convicted and released, but carried a criminal record that made her a marked woman. His wife, Rosalinda, had been arrested twice, imprisoned, and released in early 2025, and was now missing from public view. His brother Antonio had been extradited to the United States. His brother Abraham was in custody. His brother-in-law, Jose Gonzalez Valencia, was serving 30 years in a U.S. prison. His other brother-in-law, Abigail, was still fighting extradition. His son-in-law, Gutierrez Ochoa, was serving over 11 years in a U.S. prison after faking his own death. Security consultant David Saucedo told CNN that the line of succession had been broken. The only family members left who could realistically step in were one remaining brother and El Mencho's stepson. That stepson is Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez. According to the U.S. State Department, Juan Carlos was born on September 12, 1984, in Santa Ana, California. He is an American citizen. He also holds Mexican citizenship. His mother is Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. She gave birth to him when she was 14 years old. 2 years later, she met Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. They married in 1996, and El Mencho raised Juan Carlos alongside his 3 biological children. Juan Carlos grew up inside the cartel. He is listed by the State Department under the aliases El Pelon, LR3, LJP, Tricky Trace, and O3. He stands 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighs roughly 170 pounds, and has brown hair and brown eyes. That level of detail in a U.S. government reward poster tells you how closely they have been tracking him. Juan Carlos is not a background figure. He commands CJNG's Grupo Elite, the cartel's most powerful armed wing. In July of 2020, during a press conference hosted by then Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Mexico's Secretary of Defense, Luis Crescencio Sandoval González, provided an analysis of social media videos showing the military capabilities of Grupo Elite. Sandoval identified Juan Carlos as one of the group's leaders. Grupo Elite was formed in 2019 and operates primarily in the states of Zacatecas, Guanajuato, and Michoacán. It is CJNG's strike force, the unit that fights turf wars, the unit that protects cartel territory, the unit that carries out the most violent operations. On October 8, 2020, a federal grand jury in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia returned an indictment against Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez. He was charged with conspiracy and distribution of a controlled substance for the purpose of unlawful importation into the United States, and with using a firearm during a narcotics transaction. The indictment alleged he had been conspiring to traffic more than 5 kilograms of cocaine and more than 500 grams of methamphetamine dating as far back as 2007. On December 1, 2021, the U.S. State Department announced a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction, officially placing him on America's most wanted list alongside his stepfather. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence, in a September 2025 report, identified Juan Carlos as El Mencho's de facto second-in-command. The same report also named 2 other key CJNG figures. Audias Flores Silva, known as El Jardinero, meaning the gardener, a senior lieutenant who also carries a $5 million U.S. bounty, and Hugo Mendoza Gaitan, known as El Sapo, another senior lieutenant. The report additionally named Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez, known as El Chorro, El Mencho's son-in-law, who has been designated as a CJNG leader. So on paper, Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez should be the man who inherits the empire. He has the blood connection through his mother. He has the organizational position through Grupo Elite. He was already being called the second-in-command before El Mencho died. And he unites the 2 pillars that built CJNG in the first place: the Oseguera clan through his stepfather and the Valencia family through his biological mother. The marriage that created CJNG runs through him. But Saucedo, the security consultant who briefed CNN, said something critical. He said El Pelon still lacks influence among other cartel commanders. That single sentence is the most important detail in the entire succession question. Because running a cartel is not like inheriting a company. There is no board of directors that rubber stamps a new CEO. There is no legal framework. There is no contract. The only thing that holds a cartel together is loyalty, fear, and money. And if the regional bosses who actually control territory across 21 states do not respect the new leader, they do not follow him. They go their own way. Or they fight. Salcedo said it was likely that one of 4 or 5 top commanders would emerge as the next leader. He named Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, known as El Doble Ar, a powerful regional commander. He named Audius Flores, El Jardinero, who is described by the U.S. Treasury Department as a CJNG regional commander engaged in drug trafficking and violent activities, and who is widely considered one of the most respected figures inside the organization. He named Hugo Mendoza Gaitan, El Sapo, another senior lieutenant. And he mentioned a 4th figure, El Mencho's former head of security, about whom almost nothing is known publicly. The challenge for Juan Carlos is that CJNG is not a single army. According to the DEA, it operates as a franchise model. Mexican consulting group Lantia Intelligence estimates that the cartel is composed of roughly 90 separate affiliated organizations. These are local and regional groups that operate under the CJNG banner, paying tribute and following orders in exchange for access to supply chains, territory, and protection. When the central leadership is strong, the franchise holds together. When the center weakens, the franchise fragments. Each regional boss starts calculating whether they are better off staying loyal to a new, untested leader or breaking away and running their own operation. This is exactly what happened to the Sinaloa cartel. When Elmael Zambada was arrested in 2024 and taken to the United States, the cartel splintered. The sons of El Chapo, Los Chapitos, went to war with El Mayo's faction. That internal conflict is still raging. Cities burned, people died. The Sinaloa cartel, once the most disciplined criminal organization in Mexico, tore itself apart. Al Jazeera's correspondent John Holman, reporting from Mexico City on the day of El Mencho's death, made the comparison directly. He said there was no obvious successor. He said the regional bosses could start disputing for power. He said they had seen this before, when El Chapo was arrested, and it eventually sparked a civil war between the different Sinaloa factions. And he warned that what looked like a government triumph could become a significantly bigger security crisis in the months ahead. The timing compounds the danger. Mexico is scheduled to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup beginning in June. Guadalajara, the capital of Jalisco and the city that was turned into a ghost town the night El Mencho died, is one of the host cities. Matches are supposed to be played there. Hundreds of thousands of international visitors are expected. The Mexican government needs stability in Jalisco more than it has ever needed it before. A cartel succession war in the same state where World Cup games are scheduled would be a security disaster on an international stage. There is also the rival threat. The Sinaloa cartel, weakened as it is by its own civil war, still controls significant territory across Mexico. If CJNG fractures, Sinaloa's competing factions might see an opportunity to move into CJNG-controlled states and seize territory while the organization is in disarray. David Mora, the senior analyst for Mexico at the International Crisis Group, told reporters that this might be the moment where rival groups see that the cartel is weakened and want to seize the opportunity to expand and gain control. Former DEA Chief of International Operations Mike Vigil echoed the same concern. He said El Mencho controlled everything, that he was like a country's dictator. He warned that El Mencho's absence could slow the cartel's rapid growth and expansion, and leave it initially weakened against the Sinaloa cartel on several fronts, where they or their proxies were already fighting. But there is one thing that most analysts agree on. CJNG will not disappear. The infrastructure is too vast, the supply chains are too embedded. The precursor chemicals flowing from China through the port of Manzanillo in Colima will continue flowing, regardless of who runs the organization. The fentanyl labs scattered across Jalisco and neighboring states will continue producing. The distribution networks moving drugs into all 50 US states, into Europe, into Asia, into Australia, will continue operating. The demand has not changed. The product has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the man at the top. Eduardo Guerrero, the director of Mexican consulting group Lantia Intelligence, told CNN that CJNG's franchise structure means you need a more complex, more sophisticated strategy to weaken and dismember them. Killing the leader, he suggested, is not enough. The organization is decentralized enough that it can survive losing its founder. What it cannot survive, possibly, is a prolonged internal war over who replaces him. That is the real danger. Not that CJNG dies, but that it cracks open and the pieces fight each other, and ordinary Mexicans get caught in the crossfire the way they always do. Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez is somewhere in Mexico right now. He is 41 years old. He is carrying a $5 million American bounty. He is wanted by a federal court in Washington, D.C., and he is either about to become the leader of one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the planet, or he is about to fight a war with the men who believe the job should be theirs. El Mencho spent 30 years building CJNG from nothing. He took a splinter group of the Milenio cartel and turned it into a $50 billion empire with operations in more than 40 countries. His son was supposed to inherit it, and the Americans locked him away forever. His stepson was next in line, and the question now is whether being next in line is enough when the men who actually control the territory have guns of their own and ambitions to match. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the rise and fall of the CJNG dynasty, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.